Well, hello everyone. Welcome to chapter 2 of the Mistress of Orion Hall. Are you ready for chapter 2? I hope you are, because we're about to begin. We're about to start. Yes, we are. Some of you, there might be a second chance coming, a second startup in a particular area of your life. Okay. I feel like you have done a lot of cleansing. All right. I also feel like you may have been removing a lot of things from your life. Please take it how it resonates. So, here's your candle. So let's see how far we can get. You might be asking yourself that question, or maybe somebody else may be asking you that question. I'm not sure. There's always a reason why I say certain things. Okay. So welcome again to chapter 2. Interesting. The first quote I'm looking at says, "The hardest crusts always fall to the toothless." So you may have been dealing with some crusts, breadcrumbs, my friend. Hardest, something may have been hard for you, and you might have been picking up, obstacles being fallen at your path. You may have been grabbing them. It has been tough. It has been tough, my friend. Okay. But let's see what the book has to say. Let's begin. Lisa spent most of the day at the ship's rail as the little vessel wound its way through the Greek islands, along the watery routes where Odysseus sailed, to the adventures that Homer relates, where Paris sailed on his high-prowed ships with beautiful Helen of Troy, where Western civilization was cradled. You might be a historian, you may like history. She delighted in picking out the different islands as the ship threaded its way through them. Mykonos, Delos, birthplace of Apollo. Crete, where St. Paul sought heaven from the storm. Something about storm is coming. Okay. Patmos, where John wrote the last book of the Bible in exile. Rhodes, home of the Colossus and of scholarship, each of them a pearl in the necklace of Western culture. Somebody seeing you as the pearl, or you're about to find a pearl. Okay. Historical pearl, to be more precise for someone here. Only when it grew dark and she could no longer make out the shapes of the islands, shrunk out like footprints of history. Talking about history, did she go to her cabin and change for dinner? Most of the other passengers were traveling in what was still called, in those waters, steerage, and Lisa found that she, her aunt, and an elderly gentleman were the only ones besides the captain's staff in the dining room. It was lucky at that, she decided, for the dining salon was hardly large enough for many more. They were midway through the meal when she noticed the little vessel had begun to roll and pitch with increasingly severity. Wow. "I am afraid we are in for a bad weather," the captain said. A serious-faced man whose name was Karapoulos. "One of our violent and sudden Mediterranean storms. They blow in from the north. The island people call them the Meltemi. Everyone must stay in their cabins until the storm is over." Wow. He finished his wine and his eyes took in each one of the travelers. "There's nothing to worry about in regards to the ship." Okay, so you might be scratching your head right now. "It may be very uncomfortable for a while, as the ship will bob about like a cork, but she will stay afloat. The decks are something else again. They are extremely dangerous in the storm. Even my experienced crewmen move on them only if they must. So please keep to your cabins. So there's some sort of a warning of a storm happening. Okay. He rose and motioned to the mate. Please escort the two ladies to their cabins now, he said, bowing stiffly and turning his heel to leave. Lisa stood up with Maggie and caught the edge of the table as the ship rolled suddenly. And then they both followed the ship's officer from the saloon. The walk to the cabins was a short distance on the open deck, and Lisa felt the sting of salt spray. She glimpsed a dark, towering wave rise up over the top of the ship's rail, making her feel very helpless and tiny. The mate held open for them the door that led to a short, inside corridor protecting the cabins. They half fell into the corridor and heard the door shut behind them. I think we'd best stay in our cabins, Maggie said, as the ship lurched again. I'll see you in the morning. Maggie waved a cheery good night, and Lisa waited to see her disappear inside the cabin before going into her own. Alone, the girl took off her dress and lay down on a small bed in her brown panties, turning off the low light that made her dizzy as it swayed and swung with every roll of the ship. In the darkness, she listened to the sound of the sea, punishing the sides of the little vessel, slamming its great fists into the steel and wood with thunderous regularity. The rolling and pinching took on a rhythm of its own, and she finally fell asleep. I think like this is something that's going to happen overnight. Okay, let me tell you for you. But it was a fitful sleep, and she half woke with every pitch that was harder than the others. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep when she suddenly wakened to a cry, her name being called. It was Maggie's voice. Lisa sat up listening, but there was only the sound of the sea and the wail of the wind. Had she imagined it? Dreamt it? The wind could have played tricks with her sleeping mind. She heard the wind howl again and again, a faint call. It was her name, she gasped silently, or it sounded like it. She swung from the bed, threw on slacks. I have chills on my back right now. Threw on slacks and blouse and raced into the corridor. Water from the outside had come in under the corridor door, and the floor was wet under her bare feet. She hurried to Maggie's room, paused at the door, and called her aunt. There was no answer. Lisa opened the door. The cabin was empty and dark. Fright seizing her in its cold grip, she reeled and ran up the few steps to the door, to the deck. There was nowhere in the short corridor Maggie could have gone except up onto the deck. Pressing her lips together with characteristic determination, Lisa pushed on the door and went out. A cascade of cold water, and I was meant to say hot, so I feel like she may have been hot with fear, struck her like a blow, flinging her against the outside wall of the cabin, bouncing her head hard against the wood. Her hand found the brass rail that ran along the cabin wall and closed around it. The ship pitched and the water drained from the deck in a rush. She rubbed her eyes dry with the back of one hand and peered across the deck through the darkness. There was a form clinging to the outside rail, prone, hanging on for dear life with both hands. It was Maggie, she saw. Maggie, inches and seconds from being swept into the raging sea. The ship heaved, and she saw a wall of water crash over the rail. It hit Maggie's form, jarring her grip loose. Maggie slid along the wet deck, pushed by the force of the water. This roll was carrying her in, towards the cabin, but Lisa knew that when the ship reversed its roll, her end would be swept back over the rail and into the sea. Wow. Oh my gosh. The girl let go of her grip on the brass railing, fell onto her stomach, and let herself slide across the deck toward Maggie. Could she reach the older woman in time before the ship started to roll back over the other way? Lisa clawed with her hands on the deck, trying to help the water. As it swept her along, water washed over her, pushing her on, spinning her sideways. The ship started to keel over the starboard. She saw Maggie begin to slide away from her, pushing with her feet, getting enough leverage to half dive, half slide forward. Lisa got an arm out and felt her hand close around Maggie's wrists. She pulled hard, and they both slid down the tilting deck. But Lisa counted on her added weight to keep them from being swept overboard. She was alongside Maggie now, getting a firmer grip on the older woman's arm. She saw the mountainous sea rearing up in dark green fury. You're about to receive a message. As the ship dipped into it. They were sliding hard now into the rail. Lisa felt her body hit the ridge of the uprights of the rail and sent her beneath out in pain. She locked one arm around. I feel like her about to look in on the lock. One arm around an upright and clung to it, her other arm tight around Maggie. She felt Maggie's hands gripping her waist. The rail dipped, the water rushed over them, and the sea pulled at them, trying to tear them away and into its surging grasp. But Lisa clung on, her arm hurting terribly, her muscles weakening. She felt Maggie slip off with the other hand, but the older woman still kept on a grip with the other. "Hang on," Lisa shouted as the rails started to come up out of the water. The sea that poured over them swept on, leaving only wind-blown spray stinging their soaked bodies. The ship was almost on an even keel, resting there for a long moment as the sea gathered itself for another assault. "Come on," Lisa gasped, releasing her grip on the rail. They had perhaps 30 or 40 seconds, she knew. On her knees, she scrambled forward the center of the deck, Maggie following along, clinging to the waist of her slacks. Through the driving rain and water, Lisa saw the yellow square of light above from the ship's pilot house. A flight of steps, a steep ladder, led to it from the deck. Lisa reached it, grabbing the lowest rank with both arms, as the ship went into another sharp roll. Maggie landed against her, and Lisa positioned her body to press the older woman against the wall. The sea swept over the rail again and washed over them, but Lisa held her arms tightly locked around the lower steps of the ladder. Her shoulder muscles cried out of the water as the water pulled at her body and lifted her to press her hard against the sharp edge of the ladder. But she kept her hold, and the sea swept back for another try. Desperation giving her the strength to scream, she cried out as the ship righted itself again. She screamed again and again and heard the pilot house door open. In moments, strong hands were lifting her up, pulling her into the warmth and light of the little pilot house. She saw another seaman bring Maggie in. The captain was there, besides the man at the ship's big wheel. "What were you doing out on the deck in the storm?" he asked Lisa, while a crewman propped Maggie's soaked form against one wall and gently massaged her face. Lisa was glad to see the semblance of color returning to her aunt's cheeks. "I woke up and heard my aunt calling me," Lisa said. "I went to her cabin and she wasn't there. I heard her again and went outside." "It's a miracle you weren't both swept overboard," Captain Karampoulos muttered. He looked down at Maggie. The older woman was breathing evenly, but her eyes were still shut. "I'll wait till later to question her," he said. "She's in a state of shock. Get some brandy." One of the crewmen reached into a drawer to one side and produced a flask. A little was poured into Maggie's mouth. Lisa saw her aunt cough, her eyes open, and then watched as the woman took in more small sips of the brandy. The captain peered out the window. "The worst is past," he said. "You'll be able to return to your cabin soon." He fastened an eye on Maggie as two sailors lifted her to her feet. Maggie's eyes were still dazed, and Lisa went to her side. "What happened, Maggie?" the girl asked gently. I'm not sure," Maggie said, shivering. Lisa's wet clothes were making her own skin run cold. The captain interrupted. "My men will take you to your cabins. Change into dry clothes at once," he said. "I will come down soon and speak to you both then." Lisa and Maggie were escorted down the ladder by two crewmen. The sea was still monstrous, but the terrible wind had died down, and the water, almost reluctantly, was only sweeping by sides of the little vessel. Inside her cabin, Lisa striped quickly, dried her wet body, and donned a fresh pair of slacks and a sweater. She went to Maggie's cabin, and her aunt opened the door, embracing the girl in a tight grip. "Lisa, my dear," the older woman said. "Thanks to you, I'm alive and not out there in the Mediterranean. Saving me is getting to be a habit." Lisa laughed and stepped back. Maggie looked better. Her eyes were back to their usual commanding blue, with the dazed shock gone from them, and she was warm in a wool robe. "But what happened, Maggie?" Lisa asked, growing serious. "What were you doing out there anyway?" Maggie's lip tightened. "I was asleep when someone knocked on my cabin door and called to me," she said. "I got up, put on a shift, and went outside. There was no one. Then I heard my name called again from outside on the deck. I followed the sound and no sooner opened the door to the deck when a wave knocked me off my feet. The rest is still a terrible jumble and nightmare. I called for you. I know, and you obviously heard me." "What about the person that called you?" "There was no one," Maggie said, her jaw tightening. "No one at all." "What kind of voice was it?" Maggie passed a hand over her forehead. "It sounded like it could have been you," she said. "A high-pitched voice. I guess I was still partly asleep when I went outside." Maggie looked at Lisa's frown and she nodded her head. "Say what you're thinking, my child," she said. "I really don't know what I'm thinking," the girl answered truthfully. "Are you sure someone called you?" I was sure then, Maggie said. I still say so. It's what I'll tell Captain Karapoulis. But in truth, my dear, I don't know. I just don't know. It could have been the wind or a dream. A dream? Lisa echoed. Do you sleepwalk, Maggie? No, not usually anyway, Maggie said gravely. But it has happened at times when I've been unusually tense and troubled. It could have happened tonight. Maggie rolled and poured her fist into her hand in exasperation. Oh, I wish I could be sure of what it was, she said. Of what brought me out on that deck. I heard someone call me, that's definite. Then that's what it was, Lisa said. But why and where did they go? Maggie's eyes were grave again. You can hear a definite call in your mind, my dear, she said. Even the wind can do it. But to you, when you hear it, it's real. I suppose so, Lisa said, pondering the thought. Maggie put her hand on the girl's shoulder. You go back and get some sleep. It's been a difficult night, and I'm sure you're more than a little sore. Lisa had to smile in agreement. Her arms and shoulders ached, and she suddenly terribly tired. She said good night and went to her cabin. The ship was rocking almost gently now, as she lay in the darkness of the cabin, wondering where the truth lay in Maggie's words. What had made the woman venture out onto the storm-swept deck to certain death? The wind playing tricks with her sleep-filled mind? Her own mind hearing things that were really only to itself? Being pulled on by the strange forces which pull on all sleepwalkers? Or had there been a voice cleverly calling Maggie to certain death? Death which would have been an accidental tragedy at sea. The conflicting possibilities danced in her mind until sleep put an end to their disturbing carousel. In the morning, after sleeping late, she dressed and found Maggie already taking in the warm sun in a chair on the deck. It was so bright and cheerful that the night seemed something that had never happened. But the real bruises on her ribs told her it had happened, all too real and frighteningly. It seemed ridiculous to voice her thoughts in the brilliant sunlight, but she plunged on anyway. Suppose someone did call you out on deck last night, Maggie, Lisa said, sitting down next to her aunt. You know what that will mean, don't you? Suppose you spell it out for me, Lisa, Maggie answered, looking out at the water. It would mean someone tried to kill you and make it seem like just another shipboard accident, said Lisa. A foolish woman who went out on deck during the storm. Why would anyone want to do that? To keep you from opening Orion Hall, Lisa suggested. You're still thinking of those warning letters and that liar trying to get me to stay away, Maggie said. I guess so, Lisa admitted. Nonsense, my dear, Maggie replied. Nobody wants me away from Orion Hall enough to commit murder. I've been thinking a lot about last night, and I've concluded I must have been sleepwalking. It's happened before, every time I've been under stress and strain for a long period. I'm afraid it was nothing more spectacular than that, my dear. The Greek in you certainly comes out in that imagination of yours, Lisa, my girl. Lisa sat silently, annoyed with herself for having brought it up. Stop leaning to the dark and devious, Lisa Bowen, Maggie sighed gently. Walk around the ship, clear your mind, think of what fun we'll be having soon. It was one of those terrible things that turned out all right, largely thanks to you, but nothing more. Lisa nodded, got up, and walked away. The water was a rich calm blue, and the sun so very warm and life-giving. On the forward deck, the main part of the passenger list milled about in noisy profusion. Lisa walked to the stern, sat down on the flat top of a deck cleat, and looked out at the sea. Had she been too quick to leap to the dark and devious, in Maggie's words? It was more than possible. She'd always been too quick to follow her emotions, too trusting of the wisdom of the heart. When she'd woken this morning, all she could think of was that accidents. First the crane and now this. Were too coincidental. But in truth, she had to admit that coincidences didn't exist, and accidents often happened in threes. Interesting. She would have to get hold of herself, she thought angrily. Logic, reason, not emotional flights of fancy, should color her thoughts, she told herself sternly. Somebody's arriving. Somebody's arriving. She leaned back against the railing and let the sun warm her, and the gentle roll of the ship put her into a half asleep, curled up like a child in a corner. The cry of seagulls woke her, and she got up to see an island outlined ahead. Hurriedly, she went down to her cabin, pausing at Maggie's open door. "Cyprus," Maggie said. "Get your things together." Lisa hurried to her cabin and packed quickly, and soon she was crowding the rail beside Maggie, gazing excitedly at the harbor port of Kyrenia, as the little vessel nosed its way toward a low, wooden, unroofed pier. Beyond it, white tiled houses with gray slate roofs rose up from the small, neat harbor. Whitewashed walls circled the ascending rows of houses and mounted the hillsides in an orderly progression. The words of the gypsy woman came back to her. Though the woman's song had spoken of Kyrenia, Lisa felt it was meant for far more than this one port, and a strange ominous quality remained with her. The vessel made fast, and the disembarking passengers headed down the gangplank to the dock, Lisa following Maggie down with the others. One of her first acts, she decided, would be to find a book on the island and learn more about it. She disliked living somewhere and knowing little of the land's history. The swaying of the gangplank gave way to the firmness of the dock, and Lisa gazed out to the stone street that bordered it. As she did so, she saw the man, his high boots carrying him from the dock to the street. He glanced back, and she saw the gaunt face, the deep eyes. Was it the same man, she wondered? It certainly seemed so. Again, she saw others with high boots and short dark jackets pass by. There was something unforgettable about him, even though the attire seemed to be common of Cyprus, along with deep eyes and strong-lined face and glistering black hair. "You stay here with the bag," she heard Maggie say. "I'll try to find us a taxi. We've a long trip to Kyrenia." Lisa sat down on a suitcase and watched the men that passed on the sand-drenched street. Big men, strong men who strode with their chests out, men with bodies that radiated an animal strength, a masculine sensuousness. She would say nothing to Maggie about the men, she decided, not unless something occurred that she could be certain was more than her imagination. Her thoughts were interrupted by a coughing, choking noise, and she peered down the street to see Maggie's arm wavering from the window of a battered vehicle that sputtered its way towards her. It moved in fits and starts as though it were a child's toy, and Lisa found herself glancing at the rear of it to see if there wasn't a giant key extending out with which to wind it up. It was patched together with parts and pieces from a dozen other cars. No two alike, it seemed, giving it the appearance of a metal patchwork quilt. Maggie got out and the driver followed her and began putting their bags on a rickery roof rack. He was an impassive man with a large and flowing brown mustache. Lisa got into the rear of the taxi beside Maggie and they started off with a series of lurches. "This thing will never make it to the end of town," Lisa whispered. "He assured me he often drives to Carmania," Maggie said. "Anyway, it was the only one I could find." To Lisa's surprise, the chugging and lurching stopped when the driver shifted gears and gained more speed, and they began the drive along winding roads, mostly hugging the shoreline. I had to pause for 1 minute. Hillsides of alders, figs, and dates went by, brightened by spots of tangerine and lemon groves. They passed countless little villages of white granite houses with gray roofs, a few painted orange, neat and clean, and with a sort of pattern to their random clusters. Some hugged the seashore, while others perched atop the basalt cliffs as though a giant hand had set them there. She saw mules and mule carts, a few bicycles, and still fewer cars. Lisa noted the way narrow stone paths cut through the hills like so many white threads. There was an unyielding hardness to the stone face of this island that contrasted with the lushness of the palm trees and the tall cypresses and the softness of the fig and date arbors. It was late afternoon when they finally reached Carmania, and the taxi rolled slowly through the town, which huddled at the edge of the sea. Chickens crossed their paths with total unconcern. A few old men looked up from the coffee houses as they passed. They had just reached the end of town when the taxi halted. Lisa looked out to see the big house rising up from the water's edge, towering and massive. She had never seen it before, not even a picture of it, yet, in some strange way, she knew it at once. This was Orion Hall, touching the water at one side and seeming to grow out of the hills on the other. It rose in a series of terraces. Set back from the terraces was the great castle-like house, two tall turrets standing at each end. The great house seemed to frown down on the little village, forbiddingly, ominously, possessively. The two big turrets coming down like the legs of a huge eagle. In between the two turret legs was the main body of the house. The top parapet curved outward, beak-like. My gosh. You're about to receive a break. It was a forbidding place, and yet Lisa felt herself drawn to it, wanting to rush inside. She hurried along with Maggie and pushed against the tall oak door at the bottom of the house. The door opened slowly, just enough for them to enter, and Lisa was inside first. She was struck by the silence of the great house as she stood in awe and gazed around her. The walls were a huge stone block with dark oak paneling in the entryway. Stone and tile floors and corridors stretched out in all directions. Lisa walked to the edge of what was obviously the main dining hall. A huge long table stood in the center, wrapped in protective sheets of cloth. A tremendous fireplace stood at the far end of the room, and on the walls crossed laces and various horned heads peered back at her. She followed Maggie up a flight of steps, and they found the bedrooms on the second floor, big rooms with a fireplace in each one. Maggie took the inside one and Lisa the other, diagonally across the arched corridor. Her windows looked out over the sea. Each room had a big four-poster bed in it, also wrapped in protective sheets of cloth. "We can undo things later," Maggie said. "It'll be dark soon. We'll best get some food and firewood in the house first. There's got to be some sort of market in town." "I think I saw one down a side street as we came in," Lisa said as they hurried down the stairs. Once again, despite the stone-walled closed corridors and the grim massiveness of the place, it didn't seem a house that had been closed for over half a century. No, it seemed a house waiting for someone to return to it, and she felt strangely drawn to Orion Hall once again. She wondered why, because it was really quite a frightening, forbidding place. Outside, Lisa found the narrow street she had glimpsed before. The market was beyond it, opening up into a small square. There were stalls of fruits and vegetables, meats and sausages. There were mostly old women, very old women, tending the stalls, in long black dresses with black shawls pulled up over their heads, giving them all a nun-like appearance. There were few young women, Lisa noted, and the few she saw also wore somber clothes. But they had their heads bare, and she envied the thick, luxuriously shining blackness of their hair. She and Maggie were, of course, new in town, and she expected to be stared at, but not the way she saw the old woman look at her, some with frowns of disbelief, some with their mouths open, some with what could only be called a fear in their black eyes. She had to think again of the strange way the man in the high black boots had looked at her outside the hotel in London. Maggie had halted at a stall where three black-shawled, wrinkled old crones stood. One of them looked at Lisa, crossed herself, and turned away. Suddenly, another of them reached out and thrust a handful of fruits at the girl. Lisa looked at the round, red-orange fruit about the size of a plum and felt herself sinking away, her face contouring in unreasoned fear and horror as she heard her voice gasping through tingled throat muscles. "No!" she cried out. "No! Take them away!" She recalled in horror, turning her head. "Lisa, what is it?" It was Maggie's voice and the older woman's hand on her arm. Lisa looked up fearfully and saw that the old woman had withdrawn the fruit. "What in heaven's name upset you so, child?" Maggie asked. "They're only pomegranates. Haven't you ever seen pomegranates before?" Lisa shook her head and muttered one word, "No." "Well, there's no need to be so upset," the older woman frowned. Why you're trembling? What is it, my dear?" "I don't know," Lisa said hoarsely. "I don't know. Come on, I'm finished here anyway," Maggie said, taking the girl's arm. "We'll go back to Orion Hall. I think you're just overtired." Maggie took her purchases and swept off, and Lisa followed, grateful to be hurried away, aware of the stares of the village women. Her breath was returning to normal, but she was still sick inside, absolutely unable to understand what happened. Why had such horror and nausea floated over her that way? That in itself was frightening, incomprehensible. She was glad to get inside the towering walls of Orion Hall, shutting out the village. She helped Maggie unpack her purchases and then went outside to find some firewood. There were dry branches at the side of the house around the curved stones of one of the huge turrets, and she brought in enough for both fireplaces, making several trips. Wow, they ate in Maggie's room, before the fire, and she felt herself unwind as she listened to Maggie's plans for the coming day. It helped to take her mind off the strange incident in the village. Not that she would forget it. She could still taste the horror that had seized her. Wow. We'll go to the mayor tomorrow and see about some servant help around the house, Maggie said. Even if it's only a man or an old couple. I'll need some help in getting the furniture and linens out of the storeroom or the cellar or wherever everything's been kept. It'll take months to put this place into any kind of shape, but thank goodness it's not all dusty and cobwebby. Lisa joined in the fun of planning, and they talked until Maggie grew tired. And then the girl went down the hall and across her room. She built a fire quickly. It was not a cold night, but the old house held dampness and chill in its stones. She walked to the window and looked down at the terraces. The first one just outside, with a door opening onto it from the room. The second terrace was beyond it, and the third one beyond that, rising up from the sea. She saw a line of stone steps at the back of the terraces leading down from one to the other. The moon, hanging high, was a cold, milk-white lantern tracing a pathway across the sea. Lisa put on a cardigan and went to the door that opened onto the terrace. The bolt was rushed shut, and she tugged and pushed and pulled to no avail. She took a heavy enduroin from before the fireplace and hammered on the bolt until it finally moved. A little more hammering and it slid back with a rusty groan. Lisa put down the enduroin and pulled at the door. It swung open, and she stepped down 4 stone steps to the terrace. She walked to the edge and looked down at the next 2 terraces, then back at the great stone turrets of Orion Hall finely glistering in the night, their dark stones touched with the moonlight. Deciding to go down to the other terraces, she turned and walked to the stone steps at the rear. She reached the big granite block at the top of the steps and turned to start down the narrow flight of stairs when she suddenly seized by invisible hands that held her there, invisible chains that bound her legs to the top step. The same sudden unexplainable dread that had seized her at the market square came to her again, this time with greater fear and a bone-chilling, icy coldness. She tried to move, but her legs refused, and she felt herself shrinking back, her body sliding itself against the stone side of the stairway wall. She heard the hard sound of her own breathing as she gazed down into the blackness of the stone steps, ominous, foreboding, frightening. She tried to force herself to move forward, to go down the steps, but something inside her was pulling her back, making her tremble, and she felt her body grow wet with sudden perspiration. She turned and found her legs running off with her, back into the house. Slamming the door shut behind her, she fell onto the big bed and lay there until her body stopped quivering. Finally, she rose, undressed, and got into bed beneath the heavy covering. What was wrong with her, she wondered, frightened. What was happening to her? Was it merely the frightening ominousness of the steps as they disappeared into blackness? Somehow that was not enough, not the icy dread that had seized her. Had her own dark imaginings made her react in a strange ways to simple things? Why did this cavernous old house seem so frightening and so comfortable to her at the same time? She turned on her side, recalling Maggie's words about the dark, untroubled imagination. About her dark and troubled imagination. She wouldn't let it gain the upper hand and hold her in its powers. She was just overtired, Lisa told herself, and finally she went to sleep, tossing and turning fitfully. She dreamed strange dreams in which black-robed figures slowly walked through mountainous waves like a line of underwater pallbearers. She woke up wet with perspiration and saw that the moonlight had flooded her room with its blue-white light. She went to the window and gazed down at the terraces and the sea below. At the beginning of the winding steps that went down at the rear of the flagstones, she finally went back to bed and to sleep, aware in a dim way that unknown forces were gathering themselves in the towering dark walls of Orion Hall. Thank you so much.